say the word Tevis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Dust. The incredible dust up in the high country.
Yeah.
It is unbelievable. I mean, you cannot see your horse's ears at times.
So that's a big memory for you.
Yeah.
When you ride that ride, when you've ridden that ride. And Kathie, when I say the word Tevis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Greatest endurance ride in the world. Bar none.
What else do you need to say?
There's nothing else to say. You know, it just is.
Phil, what are some of the things that you remember most about Wendell?
I remember that there used to be a group of us, and Wendell was the leader, get together every Sunday and ride. And Wendell would be in the lead, and we'd go up to Robinson Flat or something, and the roads were not paved there. So anybody that wasn't in the lead truck, it got brutal. But Wendell had this group, and rain or shine, we were out riding, winter or summer. And a lot of times we'd end up back at Wendell's house, and he would invite us all in for hot chocolate. And Wendell was the kind of guy that if he liked you and you were his friend, he would do anything for you. And if you were his enemy, he would do anything to you. But he helped so many people. I lived in Auburn maybe 5-6 years and rode with Wendell, and finally I wanted to get my own place and went into his bank and asked about getting a loan, and he took me downstairs, introduced me to the manager at the branch, and says, fix him up, he's good for it. That was my entire credit check for buying my first house. And he did that for many people.
He did. And what about you, Kathie? I know that you worked for Wendell as well.
I did. I worked for Wendell, and except during Tevis time, I still worked for him, but I worked on the trails and did all that extra work. All the employees got a little upset about that because I still get paid and I get to go out and ride my horse and mark the trails. And I think everybody that worked at Hart Federal, actually it was Central California Federal Savings and Loan at the time. If you were at the main bank, you worked for Wendell on the ride. Nobody got excused from working the day of the ride. He was always a man of his word, a man's man. Like Phil said, if he liked you, he'd do anything for you. If he didn't, you're right, you're an enemy. So I do remember a story. I was upstairs working in the accounting department, and the alarm went off. And Wendell, behind his office, behind his desk, had a gun, a rifle. So the alarm went off. He gets his gun, he loads it. Actually, it was loaded. He runs downstairs, and everybody's scattered. It was a false alarm, but that's the kind of guy he was. He was going to protect the bank at the time. So my brother married his granddaughter, Marion. So my family rode quite a bit with Wendell and Marion. So some great experiences.
This is, legend has it, and I know it's true, but Kathie, you and Phil, and I want you to talk about the other people as well that sat around your kitchen table and conceived AERC, our governing body for endurance. And you were the ones that came up with the idea of having an organization that monitored endurance riding. And so tell me about that. I mean, that must have been an incredible time and excitement to see this new young sport becoming organized.
Well, it was interesting times. There was a lot of opposition to endurance riding from the Humane Society. And there was a lot of experimentation with a combination of endurance riding and competitive trail riding where there's judging involved. And the AERC started with Charlie Berrios, myself, and Hal Hall. And we were starting the American River Ride, and I was trying to start AERC. And there was a group of maybe 25, 30 people that would meet once a week to go over these events. And I wanted to incorporate AERC, and we had the big meeting, and it was voted not to do it. So Charlie did some research and found out it took 3 people to form a nonprofit corporation in California. So we grabbed Hal Hall, and the 3 of us filed the incorporation papers for AERC and held all powers to ourselves. And we just kept a point system on the first year and had a big banquet in Sacramento that had over 200 people that showed up. And my memory is not the best. I can't remember what Kathie did that first year, but I know by the second year, she was doing all the bookkeeping and the points and all that. And did you do that the first year or not?
Yeah, Marion was going to, and then she got mad, she quit. So,
Yeah.
you know, it was nonprofit, it took, you know, a lot of time, you know. At the time, I think we probably had, I don't know, 15 endurance rides in the United States. So it wasn't so bad that, and most of them were in the West region. We give a point per mile, and I think a percentage of each of the top 10 is how we kept the point system, no weight divisions at the time. So it wasn't as bad as it is now. Or, however, when you're raising 2 children and a husband, it got a little hectic at times. You know, Charlie was at the house a number of times, and he never knocked on the door. He'd just come in, and I'd be doing points, or we'd go to the beach, and I'd be doing points for the nation. And so, but it was it was the birth of something that has just created a monster. You know, I mean, that's what we live by now. That's what the rides. You know, that's the guidelines.
How does that make you feel to know how big AERC is today? At one time, one of the fastest growing sports in equestrian sports. I mean, and it started with just this idea of creating points and governing the rides.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's beyond what we fantasized could be possible. And what we did was define endurance riding. And there could be no minimum time limit. And now my memory's going to fail me. I'm not going to remember all of them. There had to be a best condition award. The fastest time with the horse in fit condition was the winner. And there was an award for every rider. And people couldn't agree on that. It sounds so simple now. But there was so much controversy, and it's almost like politics today. I remember getting up at a ride to get my award and being booed because I was with AERC. And we kept all powers to the board. The first year it was 3 members, and then we expanded it to 5, and Kathie came on. But there was no elections. It was completely autocratic, and that's the only way we could get it started. And finally, it kept growing, and we had to finance it. And sanction fees, oh man, that's like raising taxes today. And we finally had a big meeting up at John Wheeler's ranch where people came in from all over the country, and we hammered out an agreement on how we could proceed. And it wasn't popular with everyone, for sure, but it worked.
What do you think the holdback was? Was it just feeling like they didn't want these rides to have standardized rules? What do you think it was?
Well, I think it had a lot to do with NATRC because they had a lot of rules, and that's why people rode endurance rides. They go, we don't want to do this. We don't want to be restricted. But you get a group of horses together and compete, you have to put some restrictions on them. And we, I think, had 7 rules at the time, and it worked very well. I mean, back then, the horses were, the veterinarians were just as strict back then as they are now, maybe even more so. You just need, for this type of sport, the way it was growing, you needed a body that could manage it, to go somewhere with it,
Well,
3 people couldn't do that.
Well, there were so many big eagles, and there's a group of riders up in Oregon and Washington. There were riders down in Southern California and Arizona, and then here in Auburn and Central California. And they, of course, resented a lot of our success at times and were afraid of the Auburn clique. And it was very difficult to get AERC established in Auburn. And that was one of the things we finally hammered out in that meeting. But after that was done, and the first couple years of the rides paying sanction fees, it started to work out. Of course, the big disappointment at the time is that Wendell wouldn't agree for the Tevis to pay a sanction fee. And it took many years to get that resolved. And it was really heartbreaking to work on, because you just, it was like trying to bring Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders together.
So with sanctioning the Tevis, I mean, and we can, this is a good place to bring Tevis back into our conversation, is, Tevis has never really followed AERC rules in so many aspects. And both of you have been board members, presidents of the Board of Governors of Western States Trail Foundation. Why is it that the Tevis kind of stands on its own as far as AERC versus the Western States 100-mile ride?
Good question. Hard to answer.
There's no weight divisions.
There's no weight divisions. And of course, I come from both sides. As I think AERC has developed that and maybe gone, in my opinion, overboard on some of these awards. That's why we're going in a little different direction than I'd like to see AERC go. I'd kind of like to go backwards on some of this stuff. Just because you ride a ride and finish a ride, you don't need an award. You don't need 3 awards. You don't need 5 awards. If you win the ride, you get 3 or 4 different awards. And there's, it's a matter of riding a ride and finishing the ride. And I think that's where Wendell was, that, we don't need any recognition for any of this. It's about riding the trail. It's about the history of the trail. And I think that was one of the hang-ups that he really didn't want to do. It cost money. It cost $1. He had to pay $1 a rider, and he didn't want to do that. So at one point, my brother paid the $1 and got the ride sanctioned. And then the ride became sanctioned after that. But it was just a hard thing. And he, more or less, was the founder of endurance riding, and he didn't want to see these changes. I think he resented a little bit of that.
Well, and it's about tradition as well. The Tevis.
And they have come around. I mean, Tevis follows AERC rules for the most part, but if we disagree on the rules, we go with Tevis rules, and they do sanction us now. So.
Well, the thing about Wendell is he talked about the pioneering experience. And you think about it, Wendell grew up in Auburn in the 1890s. And he grew up, his family had a timber operation. And he grew up knowing the men who came out in the 49 gold rush.
Mhm.
And before cars and all of that. And so he compared himself to the 49ers, and was he as tough as they were? And that was a large part of his life, was just to prove how tough he was. And he knew the history of this region like nobody else I know. And he had one story that he told about in a gold camp. And one morning, one miner gets up and shoots the other one in Main Street. He gets on his horse and gallops out of town. And the next morning, he shows up in another camp exactly 100 miles away. And they eventually arrested him, took him back for trial. And his argument was that he couldn't possibly have committed the murder because it's impossible to ride a horse 100 miles in one day. And he was acquitted. And Wendell knew the names of the town, the names of the men, and everything when he told this story. I wish I had that information, but I don't.
You always, you get your first buckle and, it wasn't so bad after 3 or 4 weeks after the ride. So you just always plan to ride the Tevis ride. When you get close to finishing the ride 7 or 8 times, you go, well, maybe I'll get my 1,000-mile buckle. So that was a goal to get, after so many, you want to get your 1,000-mile buckle. And after I got that, I go, no. Now I'm going to say, I'll probably never ride this ride again. But a year later, I go, yeah, I think I'll ride it again. And so I just kept riding it because I wanted to ride the Tevis ride. I always, to this day, right now, I'm going to ride the Tevis in 2018. And it's just a given. That's what I like to do. So I just kept, riding the ride because that's what I like to do. I love the Tevis Trail.
Well, it's the challenge of it, and I think this comes from riding with Wendell, is you get out there and the first rule is no matter what, you don't quit. And I remember being out on the trail on a 100-mile ride and just so miserable. The horse is down, you're thirsty, it's hot, and you swear that if you just make it to the finish line, you will never do something like that again. And the thing that I found is the worse a ride is that way, the bigger the bounce you have the next day. And I remember I was serious, I would never do another 100-mile ride again. And by Monday morning, I was ready to fill out my entry for next year.
We sign up these horses for the ride because we want to do it. The horse says, I'd rather stay here and eat, if you don't mind. And, people at Robinson Platte, man, my horse really wanted to leave here, really wanted to go. And I just turn him loose and see what he does. See if he goes out there with the first horse or if he stays here and eats, We make them do this, but they're conditioned to do this. I think they're probably one of the healthiest animals, doing a sport that we do. I think it's incredible. I wish I could say that for some of the riders. I have a lot more respect for some of these horses than I do for the riders, but that's my closing comment.
The endurance riding is about the horse. And what Kathie says is true, that the horse is really giving his choice. He'd probably stay in a shade tree and eat. But on the other hand, I know these horses enjoy being out on the trail and competing. They enjoy it just as much as we do. And you can't make a horse do this if they don't like doing it. They just won't do it. And so it's something that the horses get a lot out of too.
Well, thank you, Kathie. Thank you,
Thank
Phil.
you.
And I just really appreciate you.
Thank you, Matt.